frankly, Mr. Shankly, since you ask, you are a flatulent pain in the ass. I do not mean to be so rude, still I must speak frankly, Mr. Shankly. Oh, give us money.
One of the other interesting things about Frankly Mr. Shankly, when he say, I want to live and I want to love, there is this implication that he is outside of living and loving, he's before life and love in a sense. Curiously, it's something that I think is a pain and something he suffers from, but is also something that underlies some of his most profoundly charitable and moving impulses in his work.
The third track on The Queen is Dead, I Know It's Over, gave a more explicit expression of Morrissey's sense of suffering in what remains one of the Smiths' darkest songs.
I was really pleased at the atmosphere we got on this particular track, on I Know It's Over. It's just that combination of that nice big reverbed kind of side stick hit and the bass, that dum, 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 quite soul-y really in a way, and this lush kind of double-tracked acoustic guitar. And again, a really good vocal performance from Morrissey.
I think I Know It's Over kind of rivals Asleep as one of the most bleakest and despairing Morrissey songs in the Smiths canon, most certainly. It's pretty unrelenting in its bleakness. Johnny Marr provides a suitably, funereal melody, which I think works very well, adds a poignancy to the song. It's also quite graphic, the image of, I can feel the soul coming down on his head, and even the reference to mother seems to be personal, and almost as if he's reaching out for a sense of salvation, but the song doesn't leave much hope for salvation.
Oh, mother, I can feel the soul falling over my head.
It's about feeling that you can't sustain a loving relationship because you're not interested in being in love in the way that society expects you to be. And you therefore have a certain premonition of the probability of a bad end for the relationship. But it's mixed up with feelings, general feelings of being an outsider, being alienated, not being able to get on within the world as it is, which I think you find in quite a lot of Morrissey songs.
The oddest thing about I Know It's Over, and the thing that's usually passed over, is that extraordinarily, within this darkest, bleakest of songs, we have the most moving, most profound, the most eloquent defence of charity, of love, of kindness within Morrissey's work.
The claim that you need strength to be gentle and kind really fits in this song, because this is a man actually turning in public to his mother for support. And of course we know that real blokes don't do that, don't we? No. And I think that that's the kind of popular misconception of the true nature of courage or masculinity that Morrissey wants to cast aside.
And a radical take on the traditional models of gender and masculinity, particularly those common to the industrial landscapes of the North, frequently surface in the shifting perspectives of Morris's writing.
It seems to me part of this sort of moral endeavour that he's engaged in, that he is trying to get his audience out of the habit of thinking that as people who enjoy rock music, they've got to be violent, loutish, insensitive, but on the contrary, he wants them to be, gentle, sensitive, intellectually curious, willing to listen to unusual ideas and so on. In the culture that I imagine Morrissey growing up in, a sort of Mancunian laddish culture, if you try to talk for any length of time about a serious thing, if you tried to bang on in the way that I am now, you'd get stopped. Because it's boring, you've got to be much quicker, you've got to just say something that's striking.
Bye, mind what you're doing, can't you? That Arthur Seaton's gonna get a good rattling one of these days.
There are certain violent expressions that people have. Sometimes I can really understand them.
His eccentricity, which underlies his ability to sympathise with the outsider, is, I think, something that is a positive value in his work that underwrites a lot of his positions and his ability to understand and relate to people, or to the other, to the excluded from our society, to people from other societies, or the maladjusted, and a whole range of outsider positions.
This ability to assume different positions inevitably led to speculation over who the real Morrissey was. As a self-confessed celibate with a stated interest in issues affecting women, the singer increasingly attracted questions surrounding the nature of his sexuality.
I wouldn't say that I sing from a staunchly male point of view. I think I have enough scope to really imagine how practically almost anybody would feel.
What sets him apart maybe as a lyricist is the fact that he extends the subject matter of the art form. And in terms of sexuality, it's crucial that those lyrics aren't simply heterosexual. They're sort of universal in a way that in the 80s wasn't acceptable. Because of the debates about gay rights, because of Section 28, because of the AIDS scare and negative publicity about homosexuality, I think that everyone seemed to be intolerant of artists who weren't clear about their sexuality. It wasn't just coming from the right-wing tabloid press, it wasn't just coming from Thatcherite politics, it was also coming from the gay community. And he was accused by artists such as the Communards, Jimmy Somerville and Richard Cole, of not being clear and not being supportive. You know, they felt that he should come out of some sort of closet and that he should make clear statements about who he was and what he was, and that time was to stand up and be counted. But actually, he refused to do that, and I think it's his prerogative to do that. Importantly, in terms of popular music, it's actually a negative thing to do that. If you're specific about your sexuality, then in a way you're limiting your audience.
There was something interesting about the kind of the sort of sexual persona that he kind of inhabited. Definitely, there was something, you know, not overtly male, not overtly female. There was something a little bit kind of like a little bit more grey than that. And that was interesting because the songs were often, you know, from different people's points of view, and that was something that I kind of used in my songwriting as well. I didn't want to just sort of like adopt one, you know, my own. All my songs weren't from the, you know, first person singular. It was obviously a very sort of English take on sexuality. It was always kind of like, you know, I think he saw sex as something that was quite furtive and not particularly healthy. And lots of the songs were kind of about sexual failure, which was again something that went completely against the kind of, you know, the rock textbook.
Morris's preoccupation with themes of failure and loneliness surfaced again on Never Had No One Ever. Though a third of the track ran as an instrumental, its placing alongside I Know It's Over lent a somewhat downbeat atmosphere to the album's first side, much to the chagrin of engineer Stephen Street.
The first side in general, apart from perhaps frankly Mr. Shankly, is pretty dark and gloomy. I mean, I was quite, you know, surprised when we kind of when we started recording songs for the album. I was quite surprised how dark it was, really, you know, initially.
In an album of darkness and light and shade, it's interesting that on The Queen Is Dead we get, you know, two very, very bleak songs in a row. I Know It's Over and Never Had No One Ever. I think with Never Had No One Ever, it's shorter. It's almost a refrain of I Know It's Over in a sense. It's a single verse. It doesn't hang around that long.
When you walk without ease on these streets where you were raised, I had a really bad dream.
I think the great thing about that song is the music. Not just Marr, but the combination of Marr, Rourke and Joyce. I think on that song it almost becomes a classical piece.
I was always fascinated, of course, by the premise of the lyric. It's 20 years, 7 months and 27 days before the bad dream ended. I often wondered, do you take Morrissey literally on that? Since he was born on the 22nd of May 1959, if you had 20 years and 7 months and 27 days to that, you come up with the 18th of January 1980. So naturally I was intrigued to find out what Morrissey was doing on 18th of January 1980, and if you read his epistolary diaries from the time, it's kind of, you'd perhaps not be surprised to discover that it was not, as it turns out, some great event of epic import happened on that day. In fact, it was a pretty mundane day. It was almost like a day in the life of Morrissey.
When, in 1980, he rang me up and said, "Tony, will you come and see me? I want to tell you something." And I went round to his mum's house in Kings Road, Stratford, and sat rather uncomfortably late afternoon in this teenager's bedroom surrounded by, I think it was posters of James Dean. He announced to me he'd decided he was going to become a pop star. And I looked at this kid and I almost had to stop myself laughing, because although I was in love with his genius and he could see it in his eyes, there was no way on God's earth this strange kid was ever going to be a pop star. I almost laughed in his face, but was very polite and said, "Oh, Stephen, very interesting, thank you very much."
I never had a social life. I never left the house. I just simply sat in and read and watched television and done all the things that in life are generally considered to be quite negative and quite soul-destroying.
You have a story in itself. I mean, what did he do on that day? Well, he stayed at home, thought about going out in the evening, and then decided he would stay in and cuddle up with a copy of The Murderers' Who's Who that evening, which he read, and ended it by complaining that he had a sore foot. And that was the 18th of January 1980. And in a way, I always kind of like that little detail, because it reminds me of the mundanity of Morrissey's life at the time, but also, it does in another sense reinforce what the lyrics of Never Had No One Ever are hinting at, a life of where nothing was really happening.
Personally, I would have put Some Girls or There Is a Light, perhaps, or even Big Mouth earlier on the album. I thought it kind of, it was a side one until Cemetery Gates came on and picked things back up again. It got a little bit of like the kind of thing Morrissey gets criticised for, he's just been miserable, woe is me, everything's really kind of...
A shift in tone on The Queen is Dead came from an apparently unlikely source, with Cemetery Gates emerging as far more upbeat than its title may have suggested, and a lyric that described Morrissey's own visits to Manchester's Southern Cemetery.
Even though it was about graveyards, you'd expect the usual maudlin lyric or something. That wasn't the case at all. It was a sunny day out, visiting the Southern Cemetery. It was a light, almost uplifting song in its way.
For me, it's one of my favourite Smiths tracks. I certainly think it's a great performance from everyone. And again, I was well pleased with the mix on it as well. I think we just managed to get a real nice, sweet sound to it. I don't mean sweet as in sickly sweet, but, it felt good.
Well, earlier on in their career, even before the release of The Queen is Dead, Morrissey and Marr have been hailed as great new songwriters. So Marr decided one day to sit down and if he was such a great songwriter, to try and come up with a great song. The one he came up with is Cemetery Gates, which happens to be in an open tuning on the guitar. The initial inspiration for Cemetery Gates came from the B minor to G chord change, which can be heard in the bridge of the song. It goes like this. At the start of the song is this. by choosing chords in open tuning, gave rise to tone colours and textures that aren't available in standard tuning.
I dreaded sunny days, so I'll meet you at the cemetery gates. Keats and Yeats are on your side. I dreaded sunny days, so I'll meet you at the cemetery gates. Keats and Yeats are on your side.